Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movies entitled Hunting Games. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by showing a plane just taken off from the airport. Inside the plane, we are introduced to an FBI agent named Howell, who, at that time, was targeting a robber. It is known that the robber had just stolen a large amount of money and then entered the plane to escape. Because of this, Howell chased the robber into the plane, hoping to catch him. On one occasion, Howell managed to shoot the robber, but at the same time, the robber managed to escape by free-falling from the aircraft.
This Agent Howell with the FBI.
Very, very dumb of you to be on this plane, Agent Howell.
The next day, the scene switches to a lumberjack named Will. Although he only works as a lumberjack, Will really loves his job. It is known that Will used to be a former American Special Forces officer who often fought in Afghanistan. Still, he retired early because he wanted to live a quiet life. After finishing his work, Will went to his colleague, a lumberjack named Billy Rose. Rose then asked Will if he was going hunting tomorrow. Will replied, yes, because tomorrow was the opening day of autumn hunting. Next, Rose invited Will to go to a bar later that night to unwind while discussing where they would hunt.
Yeah, well, I'll see you there.
See you soon, Will.
Okay.
Soon enough, the night arrives. We see Will and Rose meeting at a bar, as planned earlier in the day. Rose says she will hunt in the southern forest, and asks if Will will come with her. Will replies that he is tired of going south and wants to try hunting in the northern forest.
Miss Tradition.
How's everything else? I'm always here to talk to, Will.
After a long chat, Will decides to go to the north forest, while Rose will hunt in the south forest. Later, Rose excuses herself to go home first to prepare for tomorrow's hunt. The scene switches to a mercenary named Darby, who is being contacted by a mob boss via video call. Here, the mob boss says that his men had just robbed money, but there was no news, and he never returned. Therefore, the mafia boss wants to hire Darby to find his men because he believes his men have died in the middle of the forest due to free fall from the plane. It is known that the mafia boss's men are the one who jumped from the cargo plane yesterday. Hearing this, Darby stated his willingness to look for the mafia boss's men as long as the money would be divided in half. There was no other choice. Finally, the mob boss agreed to Darby's request with the condition that Darby had to start looking for him tonight. Tomorrow was the opening day of hunting, which would definitely attract many residents to the middle of the forest. But Darby convinced the mob boss not to worry, because he would definitely complete the mission.
Yeah, well, I'll check in tomorrow. And young man, you'd better get this fucking done.
Fucking asshole.
A few hours later, as Will was leaving the bar, he accidentally met Darby, who was just about to enter the bar. As it turns out, Darby recognizes Will because he was on the same team as him when they were Special Forces. Here, Will and Darby chat about their past and the opening day of the autumn hunt tomorrow.
Well, good luck to you, man. Enjoy the cigarette.
Yeah, take it easy.
The next morning, after dawn, Will was seen leaving alone for the North Forest to hunt. Will deliberately left early to enjoy the morning atmosphere of the forest. Arriving near the northern forest, Will immediately prepared firewood and planned to cook meat for breakfast. On the other hand, a southern ranger was about to open the gate. However, at the same time, he was approached by Darby and some of his colleagues. The ranger asked why Darby was not wearing his hunting clothes. Darby replied that he and his colleagues just wanted to be different. Then, Darby pulled out a gun and without hesitation, killed the ranger.
I'm gonna need you to open up that gate.
The scene moves to a local sheriff, who is visited by Howell. We know that Howell is the FBI agent who shot the robber in the cargo plane yesterday. Here, Howell tells the sheriff that last night he shot a bank robber who had sneaked onto the cargo plane. Howell was convinced that the robber must have been seriously injured or killed when he jumped out of the aircraft. Therefore, Howell asked the sheriff to report him if anyone found any money or bodies in the woods, as today was the opening day for autumn hunting. Hearing this, the sheriff is ready to help and will immediately inform Howell if any information comes in.
It takes a special kind of person to hunt in these woods.
Later that afternoon, we see Will searching for a prey animal in the north woods. After several hours of searching, Will finally finds a very large deer, and he immediately takes aim. However, before he could shoot, Will's focus was distracted by some scattered bills. In the end, Will finds the dead body of the robber along with all the money from the robbery. Of course, Will is so shocked by his findings that he decides to immediately bring the money out of the forest. Long story short, Will has now reached the edge of the forest to pick up his car, which is parked there. However, at the same time, Will was visited by Darby and several of his colleagues who had seen Will counting money. Here, Darby immediately asked Will to hand over the money right now. However, Will refused because he knew the money did not belong to Darby and planned to hand it over to the sheriff's office. Then, Darby threatened Will by saying that if Will did not comply, then Darby would not hesitate to finish him. But because Will refused, Darby immediately ordered his men to attack Will until a shootout occurred. On one occasion, Will threw a gasoline can and shot at it, causing an explosion. Afterwards, Will quickly re-entered the forest. Darby was then contacted by a mob boss who wanted to ask if he had found the money. Darby replied that the money had been found, but unfortunately, someone else had found it. Hearing this, the mafia boss was immediately angry and asked Darby to quickly get his money back.
I need the money! To make sure you get that money. And no mistakes.
After that, Darby told some of his men to split up because that day, they had to get the money, including killing Will. 30 minutes later, while Will was resting and reading a map, Darby suddenly attacked him. After a shootout, Will decides to run away again and go to another place. Then, when Will had run far enough, unfortunately, he met Darby's men again, so a shootout ensued. On one occasion, Will managed to finish off Darby's men. However, in the shootout incident, Will was shot in the side of the stomach. Even though he was severely injured, Will insisted on going south because he knew his partner, Rose, was in the southern forest. An hour later, Will finally found Rose's car, but he suddenly lost consciousness due to his gunshot wound. In short order, Will woke up and Rose bandaged and treated his wound. Rose then asked where Will had gotten that much money. Will replied that it was probably robbery, and he found it in the middle of the forest with a body. As for the wound on his stomach, Will got it from the mercenaries, who were also after the money. After explaining everything, Will asked if Rose had asked the police for help. Rose replied that she hadn't because she didn't understand what was happening. Then, Rose again asked, "Where do you want to take all the money?" Will replied that he wanted to hand it to the sheriff's office. However, Rose explained that they were both lumberjacks who had always lived in poverty. Therefore, she suggested taking the money away and dividing it equally. Plus, Rose knew very well that the sheriff and his staff were corrupt cops. However, Darby suddenly appears and manages to kill Rose, while Will himself, fortunately, is able to escape. After running quite far, Will looks confused because Darby's group always finds his whereabouts. Then, a curious Will opens the money bag, and sure enough, inside is a tracking device. Here, Will also has an idea to trick Darby's group using the tracking device. First, Will put an explosive in one of his bags. Then, he rushed to the side of the forest to put the bag in, while Will would target them from the top of the hill. A few minutes later, Darby and one of his remaining men finally appeared. There, Darby was a little suspicious of the surroundings. Then, when Darby's men checked the bag lying there.
No!
In this incident, one of Darby's men was killed, while Darby himself was shot in the hand. Will, who did not want to waste the opportunity, came down from the hill to attack Darby, and the two of them shot each other again. At one point, they both ran out of bullets and decided to fight each other. Unfortunately, in the fistfight, Will, whose stomach was wounded, had to lose to Darby. Immediately, Darby snatched his money bag. At the same time, the hunters who happened to be passing by tried to stop the two of them, so Darby decided to run away immediately. Meanwhile, Will, who was injured quite severely and had also lost his money bag, suddenly fainted. A few hours later, Darby was seen at the forest's edge. At the same time, Darby was approached by a hunter who wanted to ask if Darby needed help. When Darby was about to be invited into his car, Darby suddenly had the heart to kill the hunter, even though he had offered a lift. Then, when Darby is already in the car and checks his money bag, Darby is immediately angered because it turns out that the bag only contains stones. At night, Will, who had previously fainted, is awake in a clinic. As it turns out, Howell, the FBI agent, is also ready to ask Will some questions. Howell asks who attacked Will exactly and whether Will got his money. Will replied that he was attacked by some mercenaries who wanted the money. Will eliminate all his men except for their leader, Darby. As for the money, Will didn't manage to take it with him, and now it may have been taken away by Darby. It wasn't long before the nurse caring for Will suggested that he rest first.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Then, along comes the sheriff, who assures Howell that Will is definitely not lying, especially since several hunters who brought Will here confirmed the evidence, and they all didn't see Will with the money. After that, the sheriff invited Howell to chat in another room. However, when the sheriff is about to get some hot water in the back room of the clinic, he is suddenly finished off by Darby, who still feels a grudge against Will. Meanwhile, Howell also sees the dead nurse, and instantly realizes that the situation is not safe. Then, there was a shootout with Darby. Until, on one occasion, Darby was able to defeat Howell using a knife. Here, Darby says that he didn't need to shoot Howell because Howell would have died within 20 minutes due to his spleen being punctured. Then, Darby went into Will's room and without hesitation, shot him, but it turned out that Will was already beside the door and there was a fight between them. When Will was knocked down by Darby, Will found the gun lying under his bed. Will immediately shoots Darby until the bullets run out. However, it turned out that Darby was already wearing a bulletproof vest, so now he had a great opportunity to kill Will again. When that was about to happen, with his remaining strength, Howell was able to finish Darby off completely. After that, Will immediately rescued the badly wounded agent, Howell. 3 months later, Will was seen making a pilgrimage to Billy Rose's grave. Here, Will apologizes, because if he had taken Billy Rose away at the time, she might not have died. At the same time, Agent Howell arrives, as Howell still suspects Will is hiding the money. Will replied that if the money was in his hands, he might no longer have to work as a carpenter. Hearing this, Howell said that maybe Will was deliberately doing this so that Howell would not suspect Will and arrest him. Will said that if he was really afraid of Howell at that time, he would never save Howell and would let him die. In the end, Howell believed Will and thanked him for saving him. Then, Will said that starting tomorrow, he would try to start a new life by settling in another area. Knowing this, Howell supports Will's decision because starting a new life is not wrong.
I think now's a good time for change. Fresh start.
There's nothing wrong with new beginnings.
The next day, Will went into the forest alone to look for something. As it turned out, Will was looking for money he had previously hidden under the trees. It seems that the money is very much, so from now on, Will does not have to work as a carpenter and can go wherever Will wants.